Hi, this is Chef Paul and welcome back to Wine Basics. Today we're going to talk about arguably the most important white wine grape. Though Riesling may be wider planted across the world, Chardonnay really is the big boy when it comes to white wine grapes. You'll hear it described, and even in my wine books, described as buttery, creamy, nutty, smoky, steely. You'll hear words like apple, lemon, melon, pineapple. All different kinds of words. And the crazy thing is that, well, wait a second, it's just grapes, right? Yeah, it's just grapes. Grapes that have been allowed to grow and get to a certain level of sugar content. And winemakers will call that brix, B-R-I-X. And what they actually do is, towards the end of the season, they'll go out and actually pick individual grapes and squeeze them onto a machine called a refractometer. And what it does is it measures light going through the liquid, and by that measurement they can tell the actual sugar content of the grape. What they're trying to do is they're trying to pick the grape at the highest level of sugar concentration before it starts to rot. That's a whole nother story. And if they misjudge it, or if it rains right there, you can actually have the grape soak up water and lose sugar content. Why is sugar important? Well, sugar is important because sugar is the primary food for yeast. And yeast is the magic organism that makes wine possible. You see, when the grapes are pressed, they get first crushed and pressed into a juice that's called must. And what happens is the yeast is allowed to begin to interact with that must, and the yeast goes around gobbling up sugars and creates two things: carbon dioxide and alcohol. Simple as that. That's all yeast does. Now, how do we get all those flavors out of this? Well, the ground gives us the flavors. The French have a word called terroir, and basically terroir is everything. The ground, and you'll notice that many grapes do better in the worst possible soil conditions. The worse the soil is, the harder the vine has to work. The deeper it sends its roots to grab nutrients from the soil. In France, you'll find the better wines, they're not allowed to do anything like irrigation, fertilization, something that you might think is done everywhere. Well, it's not. They just give what the ground gives them. And that's why we'll have years in France that are spoken about in hushed tones. 2005, 2010. Amazing years that weather conditions were perfect. Well, New World places like South America, Australia, where they use modern technology, irrigation and fertilization, they can create wines year after year with the same flavor profiles and that same consistent flavor. So, how do we get all those flavors? Again, the grape has a certain profile of flavors it's going to give. And as it ages and matures, depending on the way it's done, it's going to even grab more flavors. This Stag's Leap was aged in oak barrels, in American oak barrels. Now, the neat thing about oak is that the wine is put into these oak barrels and it's allowed to sit for a certain period of time. And that oak barrel, basically, some of the wine goes into the wood and comes back out, and is allowed to come in and out of the wood as temperature changes within where it's being stored. So what happens is all those flavors, esters from the wood, are starting to penetrate into the wine, and they give them the buttery. But how about smoky? How can it be smoky? Well, before these barrels are filled with wine, the cooper who makes the barrel actually takes the barrel and puts it over a flame and toasts the inside of the barrel to char it. And that charring gives that smokiness to the wine. The same is done with whiskeys and bourbons. So on the scale of white wines, we get up into the Chardonnay, and this is on the opposite end of the scale from the Riesling that I talked about in the last episode. This is a much more complex and a complex set of flavors. And something like this while I might enjoy it with a piece of pizza or a taco salad or fish tacos, this is going to be a big player, and it's going to have a lot of flavor, and it might overpower those foods. So I might pick foods that have the kind of flavor profile to stand up against this. Roast pork, a big steak, pot roast. The kind of foods that I might expect to drink a red wine with are absolutely fine with a big Chardonnay. Now, a big Chardonnay, you don't really need food at all either with it. Many of these wines are fine to just sip on their own, but many wines need food. And you really won't be able to understand that until you start to experiment for yourself and taste the different wines with different foods. Set up your own tasting. Get 2 or 3 bottles of white wine to start with. Maybe a Riesling, a Pinot Grigio, and an oaked, importantly, an oaked Chardonnay. How do you know if it's oaked? Typically on the back of the bottle, it will say whether it is oaked or unoaked. There's a coming trend in unoaked Chardonnays, typically out of Australia, New Zealand. To me, they don't have the flavor profile. They taste more like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Pinot to me. To me, Chardonnay needs that wood. But if you'll pick maybe 3 or 4 white wines, do your own little tasting. Try them each with the same foods, and then write down the differences. What you feel, what you taste. It's going to be really important the next time you go out to the restaurant and you order the big bone-in ribeye steak, and you've decided, wow, I'd love a glass of Chardonnay to go with that. Something that's not going to overpower the steak, and something the steak isn't going to overpower. It's important to learn balance. Like anything else in life, balance is important. Balancing your wines doesn't mean holding them without them falling over. Balancing wines means understanding what goes with what. I hope as you continue this journey with me, you're going to learn some more wine pairing ideas, and maybe you'll even do your own tasting. That'll help you pick your path down the road to learning about wine. All right? So thanks again for joining me, and come back and we'll see you next time with more wine.